The palace groans under the weight of silence. St. James's, once a hive of courtly ritual, now breathes only in whispers. The tapestries hang limp, their colors fading in the dim, shuddering candlelight. The air is thick, a mixture of stale incense, medicinal herbs, and the sour stench of sickness that no perfumed cloth can conceal. Servants glide like shadows, their eyes lowered, their steps softened, as though even the scrape of a heel upon stone might disturb what lies within the Queen's chamber. There, upon a vast bed draped in crimson, lies the monarch of England, diminished, distorted, and dreadful to behold. Her body is swollen, her face sallow, her skin tinged the yellow hue of wax. The once commanding frame of a queen has become a grotesque cage for pain. Her breath shallow and uneven, each exhalation rattling like the turning of a key in a lock that refuses to yield. Those who dare approach recoil at the sight. Once she inspired awe, now she elicits horror. The eyes that glare from the pillows are ringed in darkness, fever-bright yet dim with exhaustion. Her lips, cracked and gray, struggle to form prayers that falter into silence. Beneath the heavy covers, her hands twitch, bony, mottled, restless, clutching at rosary beads slick with sweat. In corners and corridors, courtiers murmur what no physician dares to say aloud: that the Queen is not merely dying, but rotting. That her body is failing not in dignity but in disgrace, consumed from within by something unnatural, unholy. Some whisper of God's wrath, others of divine punishment, while the more fearful lower their voices and insist it is a curse, the slow, merciless unraveling of a soul who burned too many at the stake. And so the question spreads like a shadow across the palace walls. Is England's first crowned queen regnant the victim of disease or of destiny? Is this the end of a mortal woman, or the ghastly judgment of a queen known to history by a single blood-soaked name? This is the grotesque end of Mary Tudor, the queen remembered forever as Bloody Mary. Before we uncover the truth behind her rotting death, join us here at Echoes of Time by subscribing, so you never miss the darker side of history. She was not always the figure of terror that haunted England's memory. Long before the whispers of Bloody Mary clung to her name, Mary Tudor was a child of promise, the only surviving child of King Henry VIII and his Spanish queen, Catherine of Aragon. Born in 1516, she was the center of her parents' hopes, a radiant flame in the uncertain future of the Tudor dynasty. Henry doted on her, parading his daughter before foreign envoys as proof that his line would endure. Music, language, learning. Mary excelled at them all. A precocious child adored by her mother and praised for her wit and grace. For a time, the little girl was cherished not only as a daughter but as the beating heart of England's pride. Yet the warmth of her father's affection would not last. Henry VIII's hunger for a male heir, and his passion for another woman, shattered the stability of Mary's world. The king cast aside Catherine, declaring their marriage null, erasing decades of union with the stroke of a pen and the violence of his will. For Catherine, exile and humiliation followed. For Mary, the blow was crueler still. Stripped of her title as princess, branded illegitimate, she became a ghost within her own court, forced to serve in the household of her infant half-sister Elizabeth, the child of Anne Boleyn, the woman her father placed above her mother. Mary, once her father's pride, now endured the torment of public degradation. Courtiers who had once bowed to her whispered of her disgrace. The girl who had been promised the future of a throne was reduced to a pawn. Her legitimacy, her very identity, a subject of scorn and suspicion. It was in these years that her character was forged in fire. She clung desperately to her mother's faith, to the rituals and prayers of the old religion, as if in devotion she might find both solace and vindication. Every humiliation deepened her piety. Every betrayal carved into her spirit a wound that would never heal. In this crucible of abandonment and shame, Mary's view of the world hardened. Her faith became not just belief but armor. Her suffering became not just personal tragedy, but proof that the path of righteousness lay in obedience to the church her father had defied. The child of promise had become the pariah of the Tudor court, and the scars left by her father's betrayal would one day shape the fire she unleashed upon her kingdom. Mary's childhood was marked by betrayal and faith in equal measure. What would you have done in her place? Bowed to the king's will, or clung to your mother's faith? Share your thoughts below, and if you want more hidden truths of history, subscribe now to Echoes of Time. The years of humiliation carved Mary into something harder than the fragile child her father had once paraded. When Henry died, and Edward VI, her sickly half-brother, ascended the throne, Mary lingered in the shadows, tolerated but never trusted. She was watched with suspicion, the stubborn Catholic who would not bend to England's new Protestant faith. Yet while courtiers dismissed her, the common people did not forget. They remembered the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the woman who had suffered unjustly, the rightful heir who had been cast aside. When Edward's life waned, the crown was steered toward another. Lady Jane Grey, the teenage girl thrust unwillingly into a queen's seat by scheming nobles. But the people's loyalty was not with Jane. When Mary raised her banner, thousands rallied to her cause. Farmers, townsfolk, and even members of the nobility declared for her. They marched through the streets chanting her name, the long-abandoned princess restored as England's hope. In July 1553, Mary rode into London not as a forgotten pariah but as a triumphant sovereign. The bells rang, crowds pressed close, and the city erupted in cheers. At 40 years old, she was at last queen in her own right, England's first crowned queen regnant. It was a victory that seemed to heal decades of disgrace. To many, she was the living proof that justice had triumphed, that God had restored what had been unjustly torn away. Yet within the jubilation lay the seed of fear. For Mary was not merely a queen rising from the ashes of betrayal. She was a woman hardened by exile, sharpened by faith, and determined to restore the old order at any cost. The underdog had claimed the throne, and with it the power to turn her scars into weapons. Her reign began in triumph, but the triumph would soon curdle into terror. Some cheer her, others fear her. Which side are you on? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear both the adoration and the horror in stories like this. Mary's triumph was never meant to be merely political. To her, the crown was a divine commission, a sacred duty to heal the wound her father had inflicted on the soul of England. The break from Rome had torn the kingdom from the faith of her childhood, the faith of her mother, and Mary would not rest until the old religion was restored. To her, England's salvation depended on it. But salvation, as Mary conceived it, could not be won through tolerance. It demanded fire. Within months of her coronation, she set in motion the machinery of religious persecution. Parliament repealed her father's acts, reunifying England with the Catholic Church. Those who resisted, bishops, ministers, even common men and women, found themselves accused of heresy. And in Mary's England, heresy meant death. The executions began quietly, almost methodically, but soon the pyres were rising across the realm. In Smithfield, Oxford, and countless towns and villages, Protestants were bound to stakes, wood piled at their feet, their voices raised in prayer or defiance as the flames consumed them. The fire crackled, the smoke billowed, and the scent of burning flesh carried on the wind. Neighbors watched, children cried, and the image of mercy gave way to terror. By the end of her reign, nearly 300 souls had been reduced to ash. Some were learned men of the cloth, others humble artisans, even young women, all condemned for refusing to abandon their new faith. Their deaths carved scars into the national memory. It was not only the executions themselves that shaped Mary's legacy, but the stories that followed them. John Foxe, an exile who fled Mary's wrath, gathered the tales of the martyrs into a book that would echo through the centuries. The Acts and Monuments, known later as the Book of Martyrs. Its pages dripped with suffering. Its prose painted Mary as a monster who reveled in the agony of innocence. Whether Foxe exaggerated or not scarcely mattered. His book became a Protestant Bible of persecution, ensuring that Mary would forever be remembered not as the queen who restored faith, but as the tyrant who drowned her kingdom in fire. The cheers that had greeted her ascension curdled into whispers of horror. England had longed for hope, but what it received was fear. And from that fear, a name was born, whispered first in dread, then spoken as truth, a name that has clung to her through the centuries. Bloody Mary. Would you have stood defiant at the stake, or bent the knee to save your life? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Echoes of Time for more of history's darkest reckonings. For all her fire and faith, Mary knew her reign could not last without an heir. The memory of her own childhood, the annulment, the exile, the shadow of illegitimacy, haunted her. She believed her duty was not only to restore the Catholic faith, but to secure it through blood, through a child who would carry her faith into the future. And so she married Philip of Spain, the son of the most powerful monarch in Europe, a match forged in politics and sealed with devotion to the Church. But if Philip was the embodiment of power, he was also a stranger to her heart. Cold, distant, and more concerned with the Spanish Empire than the English crown, he appeared rarely at her side. Their union was not the romance of ballads but the calculation of dynasties. Mary adored him, he endured her. The people of England, wary of foreign influence, grumbled at the Spanish presence in their court. Then, at last, hope seemed to blossom. Mary's body swelled. Her courses ceased. Her physicians whispered of life stirring within her womb. The Queen glowed with anticipation, preparing the realm for the child who would unite England and Spain, who would bury Protestant defiance once and for all. Bells were ordered, nurseries prepared, christening robes sewn. In her mind, the triumph was certain. But the days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months, and no child came. Her belly softened, her sickness ebbed, and the truth revealed itself with cruel clarity. There had been no heir, no baby to cry in the palace halls, no son to carry her name, only silence and humiliation. For Mary, this was more than disappointment, it was devastation. Her court watched, pitying or mocking, as the Queen's joy dissolved into grief. Her enemies whispered that God himself had cursed her womb. The people muttered of her fragility, of her unsuitability as queen. Yet Mary could not release the hope. When her body betrayed her a second time, swelling again without life, her torment deepened into despair. Imagine her, alone in her chamber, praying over a body that lied to her, clutching her rosary as though faith might conjure the child she so desperately longed for. To a woman raised in betrayal, this was the cruelest betrayal of all. Her own flesh conspiring with fate to deny her what she craved most. A future, an heir, a vindication of her reign. History often hides the human pain behind the crown. If you think Mary was more victim than villain, comment below. And if you want more untold sides of history, hit subscribe to Echoes of Time. The hope of an heir had vanished, and with it, the last of Mary's strength seemed to fade. By 1558, her body bore the marks of a relentless and mysterious affliction. She weakened suddenly, her limbs heavy, her steps unsteady. Fever burned within her even as her skin grew cold to the touch. Her stomach swelled grotesquely, not with life but with water, her flesh tight and distended with what her physicians called dropsy. Her eyes sank deep into her face, ringed with shadows, and her once pale skin turned the sickly hue of yellow wax. The palace physicians were confounded. Some whispered of cancers hidden deep in her womb or her liver, others of a wasting sickness that no prayer could cure. Outside the sickroom, rumors spread more darkly still. God's punishment, some declared, a divine retribution for the fires she had lit across the kingdom. Among the superstitious, it was whispered that her body was being consumed from within, her flesh decaying as she clung stubbornly to life. The atmosphere at court thickened with dread. Incense was burned constantly, not in reverence but in desperation, to smother the cloying odor of illness that drifted through the palace halls. Servants moved reluctantly, their faces hidden in handkerchiefs, fearful to approach her chamber, as though the sickness itself might leap upon them. The Queen's presence, once commanding, had become a source of terror, a spectacle of decline too grotesque to behold yet impossible to ignore. And through it all, Mary endured in silence. No longer the triumphant queen, no longer the expectant mother, she was reduced to a shadow of herself, trapped within a body that betrayed her more cruelly than any enemy ever had. To those who looked upon her, It seemed less the natural decline of mortality than a slow and merciless unmaking, a queen unraveling before their eyes. Mary's decline was as haunting as her reign. Do you believe her suffering was nature's cruelty, or the weight of divine punishment? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Echoes of Time for more stories where history and horror intertwine. On the morning of November 17, 1558, the palace that had held its breath for weeks finally exhaled. Mary Tudor, Queen of England, slipped from life at the age of 42. Her final hours were quiet, marked by weakness rather than resistance. Her voice too frail for prayer, her breath little more than a sigh. As dawn broke, her crown passed silently from her failing body to the waiting hands of fate. What remained behind was no longer a queen but a husk, a body so altered by sickness that even in death it unsettled those who came near. Following the custom of her rank, her heart and bowels were removed, sealed away apart from her body, a grim ritual of preservation meant to hold decay at bay. Her corpse was wrapped, prepared, and guarded, yet whispers persisted among those who had seen her in her last days. To them, it was not only a body that had perished, but a reign that had rotted from within. Even as the embalmers worked, England turned its gaze elsewhere. On that very same day, her half-sister Elizabeth was proclaimed queen. Where Mary's rule had been fire and dread, Elizabeth promised renewal and light. The contrast was almost theatrical, as though history itself had staged the passing of one reign into the next, replacing the memory of smoke and pyres with the bright hope of a new dawn. And so Mary's legacy was sealed not by her coronation, nor by her fleeting triumphs, but by the flames she had lit and the sickness that consumed her. In the minds of her people, she became the queen of burning fires and a grotesque death, her reign compressed into a single unyielding name, Bloody Mary. Mary burned hundreds for faith, but was her end itself a kind of punishment? Comment your verdict below, and subscribe to join the Echoes of Time community uncovering the darkest corners of history. History has never spoken of Mary Tudor with one voice. To some, she was a tyrant, a queen who baptized her kingdom in fire and blood, whose name alone conjures the smell of burning flesh and the cries of the condemned. To others, she was a woman broken by betrayal, raised in exile and humiliation, who clung so fiercely to faith because it was the only certainty left to her. Her legacy was not written solely by her deeds, but by the words of those who survived her, men like John Fox, who immortalized her as a monster in his Book of Martyrs, ensuring that Bloody Mary would echo louder than Mary the daughter, Mary the wife, or even Mary the queen. Her death, grotesque and unsettling, became part of that legend. To her enemies, it was divine justice. To her supporters, it was a tragedy. The end of a woman whose heart longed for redemption, but whose reign delivered only fear. And yet, in that chamber at St. James's, as her breath failed and her body gave way, something greater than her life or her faith shifted. The crown moved to Elizabeth, and with it, England's future turned. A kingdom drenched in smoke awoke to the promise of a new age. Mary's story endures not because she reigned long, but because she reigned fiercely, and because her death was as unsettling as her life. She remains a figure trapped between justice and cruelty, victim and villain, saint and sinner. In the echo of her last breath, England's future shifted forever. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of historian we want in our circle. Subscribe to Echoes of Time so these voices from the past never fade. And if you'd never subscribe, tell us why in the comments. Let's keep the debate alive.